The American Civil War, a country that couldn't decide what it was. It is late, the kind of late where the world feels quieter than it should. Somewhere, a clock ticks. Outside, the wind moves through trees that have seen empires come and go without asking permission. Imagine standing on a dirt road in America in the year 1860. No cars, no airplanes, no glowing screens. Just the soft crunch of boots on soil, the smell of wood smoke, and a nation holding its breath without quite realizing it. The American Civil War does not begin with cannon fire. It begins with silence, with tension, with people pretending things are fine while knowing, deep down, that they are absolutely not. This is a story about how a country argued with itself for so long that it eventually reached for a gun. It is about ideals spoken loudly and realities whispered quietly. It is about freedom, power, fear, and the uncomfortable truth that history is often shaped not by villains twirling mustaches, but by ordinary people convinced they're doing the right thing. By the time the first shots are fired, the war has already been fought for decades in speeches, newspapers, courtrooms, and dinner tables. The battlefield just makes it harder to ignore. So let us rewind, slow down, let the noise fade out, and start where all good American problems begin, right after independence, when everyone is optimistic, exhausted, and wildly confident they have solved politics forever. After the American Revolution, the United States is less a nation and more a fragile experiment held together by shared memory and mutual suspicion. 13 former colonies, now states, each with their own economies, cultures, and ideas about what freedom actually means. The Constitution is drafted as a compromise document, a careful balancing act designed to keep everyone just uncomfortable enough that they stay in the room. And slavery is there, right there, not hidden, not accidental, present at the founding like an awkward guest no one wants to talk about. Everyone knows it is a problem. Everyone also knows that dealing with it directly might cause the whole thing to fall apart. So they compromise, they postpone, they invent phrases like 3/5 of a person, which somehow manages to be both mathematical and horrifying at the same time. The northern states begin, slowly, unevenly, to move away from slavery. Industrialization changes how work is done. Cities grow, factories hum. Wage labor, for all its flaws, becomes the norm. In the South, the economy tightens its grip on plantation agriculture. Cotton becomes king, and slavery becomes not just an institution, but the foundation of wealth, identity, and political power. It matters a lot. By the early 19th century, America is expanding westward like a restless animal. New territories appear on maps almost faster than anyone can govern them, and every time a new territory knocks on the door asking to become a state, the same question follows close behind. Free state or slave state? Each answer tilts the balance of power in Congress. Each decision feels existential, because it is. Compromises stack on top of compromises. The Missouri Compromise draws a line across the map, as if geography can solve moral conflict. The Compromise of 1850 tries to calm everyone down by giving each side something they hate slightly less than everything else. The Fugitive Slave Act forces Northern citizens to participate in a system many of them despise, and nothing builds resentment faster than being told you must enforce a law you find morally repulsive. Meanwhile, the South grows defensive. Criticism of slavery is not heard as debate, it is heard as attack. Plantation owners speak of honor, tradition, and states' rights, while quietly understanding that the entire structure depends on millions of enslaved people being denied rights entirely. It is a contradiction, a loud one, and contradictions tend to make people angry when you point them out. Abolitionists emerge in the North, loud and unapologetic. Some are calm and persuasive, others are fiery and uncompromising. They write pamphlets, they give speeches, they help enslaved people escape through networks like the Underground Railroad. To Southern ears, they sound like revolutionaries. To Northern moderates, they sound like troublemakers. To enslaved people, they sound like hope. And then there is the press. Newspapers explode across the country, each one partisan, dramatic, and deeply uninterested in nuance. Every incident becomes proof that the other side is dangerous, immoral, and possibly insane. Violence in Kansas between pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers earns the nickname Bleeding Kansas because subtlety has left the building entirely. In 1857, the Supreme Court weighs in with the Dred Scott decision, ruling that African Americans are not citizens and that Congress has no power to prohibit slavery in the territories. This is meant to settle the issue once and for all. It does the opposite. Northern outrage spikes, Southern confidence hardens, the middle ground shrinks to almost nothing. And hanging over it all is the unspoken understanding that whatever happens next will not be solved with polite conversation. By the time Lincoln emerges as a national political figure, the country is already cracked. Lincoln himself is cautious, careful with words, and deeply aware that saying the wrong thing at the wrong time could shatter what remains of the Union. He opposes the expansion of slavery, but he does not call for its immediate abolition where it already exists. This is not enough for abolitionists and far too much for Southern elites. His election in 1860 is the final confirmation in the minds of many in the South that the future is slipping away from them, that they are becoming a permanent minority in a country they once dominated politically. Fear sets in. And fear, historically, is a terrible decision maker. South Carolina secedes first. Others follow, one by one, like dominoes that have been carefully spaced for decades. They form the Confederate States of America, convinced that they are preserving liberty by tearing the nation in half. Because, of course they are. Washington watches, stunned but not surprised. Lincoln hasn't even taken office yet, and the Union is already unraveling. Federal forts sit in Confederate territory like unanswered questions. One of them, Fort Sumter, rests quietly in Charleston Harbor, waiting to become famous. And in April of 1861, the silence finally breaks. Cannon fire across the water, smoke rises, and with that, the argument that began at the founding of the United States becomes something else entirely, something louder, bloodier, and impossible to ignore. The war has begun, and nothing on either side will ever be the same again. The war everyone thought would be short. In the spring of 1861, there is still a strange optimism in the air, not the cheerful kind, more like denial dressed up as confidence. On both sides, people insist this will be quick, one decisive campaign, a few battles, a dramatic moment of surrender, everyone home by harvest, because that is how wars are supposed to work, right up until they very clearly do not. Young men line up to enlist wearing borrowed uniforms and borrowed courage. Bands play patriotic music that echoes off brick buildings and dirt roads alike. Mothers wave. Fathers nod stiffly. No one says what they are thinking, which is that something about this feels final. Something about this feels like the end of a version of America that will not be coming back. The Union has numbers, industry, railroads, factories, and a navy. The Confederacy has experienced officers, defensive terrain, and the unshakable belief that they are fighting for their homes. Both sides have confidence. Neither side has any idea what modern war is about to demand from them. The first major clash comes at Bull Run, or Manassas, depending on which side you ask. Even the names of battles are already contested, which feels appropriate. Civilians from Washington bring picnic baskets and binoculars, expecting a kind of violent theater. They assume they will watch the Union Army march forward, scatter the rebels, and return in time for supper. Instead, they watch confusion unfold. Smoke clouds the field, orders are misunderstood, units advance and retreat without knowing why. When Confederate reinforcements arrive by rail, something new and unsettling happens. The Union line breaks, soldiers run, panic spreads faster than gunfire. Civilians flee, abandoning baskets and dignity alike. The war does not end that day, it merely introduces itself. After Bull Run, the tone changes. Confidence becomes caution. Laughter fades. The realization settles in slowly that this will not be a quick disagreement settled by uniforms and flags. This will be grinding, exhausting, personal. The Union reorganizes under General George McClellan, a man who is brilliant at building an army and deeply uncomfortable using it. He trains his troops meticulously, drills them until they look like a professional force, and then hesitates, always hesitates. He sees Confederate armies everywhere, larger than they really are, shadows multiplied by imagination and fear. Across the lines, the Confederacy finds its early hero in Robert E. Lee, calm, dignified, and devastatingly effective. Lee understands terrain, timing, and psychology. He knows when to strike and when to wait. He knows his army cannot afford waste, and yet he is willing to take risks that seem reckless, because sometimes recklessness is the only way to survive. Battles pile up like unfinished arguments. Shiloh shocks the nation with its sheer scale and brutality. 2 days of fighting leave the ground soaked, the trees splintered, and the illusion of a clean war permanently destroyed. Newspapers struggle to explain the casualty numbers without sounding like fiction. Families read lists of names in silence, scanning for the familiar. Death becomes routine, which may be the most disturbing part. Antietam arrives in September 1862, and with it, the bloodiest single day in American history. Cornfields turn into killing fields. Sunken roads fill with bodies. The air smells of iron and smoke, and something no one wants to name. Tactically, it is a draw. Psychologically, it is something else entirely. For Lincoln, Antietam is enough. Not a victory exactly, but not a defeat either. And in war, sometimes that is all you need. He issues the Emancipation Proclamation, a document that is both revolutionary and limited. It frees enslaved people only in states still in rebellion, not in loyal border states. Critics call it weak. Supporters call it historic. Enslaved people hear something else entirely. They hear movement, direction, the sound of history shifting its weight. The war is no longer just about preserving the Union. It is now openly tied to the destruction of slavery. This changes everything. European powers who had been watching closely and considering recognition of the Confederacy hesitate. Supporting a slave-holding nation suddenly feels less comfortable. The Confederacy realizes too late that cotton diplomacy has limits. As the war drags on, the home fronts strain. Inflation hits the South hard. Food shortages spark bread riots. In the North, the draft triggers violent resistance, especially among working-class communities who feel they are being asked to die for causes they do not fully trust. The New York City draft riots explode into chaos, rage turning outward, downward, and tragically toward black citizens who had nothing to do with the law that enraged the crowd. This is what total war looks like, not just soldiers suffering, but societies cracking under pressure. By the end of 1862, optimism is gone. In its place is endurance, a quiet, grim understanding that this war will not be decided by a single brilliant maneuver, but who can endure loss longer, who can keep feeding armies, who can keep believing when belief becomes heavy. Winter settles over camps like an unwanted guest. Soldiers write letters by firelight. Some pray. Some stare into the dark. Somewhere, a violin plays badly, beautifully, because silence feels worse. The war pauses, but it does not rest, and as the snow melts and the roads turn to mud, something worse than uncertainty begins to form, the sense that the conflict is becoming something personal, that it is no longer just North versus South, but idea versus idea, future versus past. And the worst is still ahead.
The year the war turned darker. By 1863, the war has aged everyone. Faces harden, letters grow shorter. Hope, when it appears, does so cautiously, like an animal that has been chased too many times to trust open ground. This is the year when the conflict stops pretending to be anything other than what it is, a grinding test of endurance, faith, and national identity. The armies move again as spring arrives, dragging cannons through mud that seems determined to swallow history whole. Boots rot, horses die. Men adapt to misery with the quiet efficiency of people who no longer expect comfort. Commanders begin to understand that victory will not come from elegance, but from persistence. And persistence, as it turns out, is expensive. In the East, Robert E. Lee makes a decision that will define the war's memory forever. He takes the fight north, into Pennsylvania, onto Union soil. It is a gamble rooted in necessity. The Confederacy is bleeding, supplies are thin, morale needs a shock. A decisive victory on northern ground might break public support for the war, force negotiations, maybe even secure foreign recognition. A lot of hopes are balanced on this one move, as if that could ever go wrong. Gettysburg is, at first, an accident. Two armies collide not because they planned to, but because they stumble into each other while looking for shoes. History has a sense of humor like that. The town sits quietly among rolling hills, unaware it is about to become a symbol etched into the American psyche. For 3 days in July, the land tears itself apart. The first day is chaos. Units rush forward, retreat, reform, and collapse again. The second day stretches the Union line thin across hills with names that will outlive the men who fought on them. Little Round Top, Devil's Den, the Wheat Field. Places that sound peaceful until you picture them filled with smoke, screams, and metal. The third day is the moment everyone remembers, Pickett's charge. A long walk across open ground under artillery fire, lines of men advancing because they were told to, because discipline still exists, because stopping feels worse than going forward. It is brave, it is tragic, it is devastatingly futile. When it is over, the field is littered with bodies and broken flags. Lee retreats, the invasion fails. The Confederacy loses not just soldiers, but momentum. Gettysburg does not end the war, but it makes the ending visible for the first time. Almost simultaneously, far to the west, another campaign reaches its conclusion at Vicksburg. While Gettysburg dominates memory, Vicksburg quietly does something just as important. It gives the Union control of the Mississippi River, slicing the Confederacy in two. Supplies, communication, movement, all suddenly become harder. The Confederacy begins to feel smaller, more isolated, like a room where the walls are slowly moving inward. Together, Gettysburg and Vicksburg mark a turning point, not a victory parade, not closure, just a shift in gravity. Lincoln understands this. In November, he travels to Gettysburg for a dedication ceremony. The speech he gives is short, almost shockingly so. A few hundred words, no theatrics, no grandstanding, just a quiet reframing of the war as a test of whether a nation conceived in liberty can endure. At the time, some people are unimpressed, too brief, too plain. History, however, takes notes. As 1863 drags on, the nature of the war evolves again. In the West, a new figure rises, Ulysses S. Grant. He is not flashy. He does not care about appearances. He understands something others resist accepting, that the war will be won not by avoiding casualties, but by accepting them, by applying constant pressure until the Confederacy has nothing left to give. Grant's approach is brutal, methodical, and effective. Lincoln notices. He has been searching for someone who will fight, really fight, without retreating into caution every time the cost becomes visible. Grant is that man. Meanwhile, the Emancipation Proclamation begins to reshape the war on the ground. Enslaved people flee plantations by the thousands, forcing the Confederacy to confront a reality it had spent decades denying. Black soldiers begin to join the Union Army, fighting for a country that has not yet decided what it truly owes them. They face discrimination, lower pay, harsher treatment if captured, and still they fight. The assault on Fort Wagner by the 54th Massachusetts is one of those moments that forces a nation to look at itself. The attack fails militarily, the losses are severe, but the courage displayed cannot be ignored. The idea that black men will not fight dissolves under artillery fire. By the end of 1863, the war has changed shape. It is no longer about maneuvering for advantage alone. It is about breaking the enemy's ability and will to continue. Civilians feel this shift first. Railroads destroyed, crops seized, towns occupied. The boundary between battlefield and home front blurs until it almost disappears. This is no longer a gentleman's war. It is something colder, harder, more honest. And as the calendar turns, the Union prepares to apply pressure everywhere at once. East, west, south. No rest, no pause, just movement. The Confederacy is still standing, still fighting, still dangerous. But now, for the first time, the question is not whether the Union can win. It is how much it will cost to finish.
The long grind toward the end. By 1864, the war no longer shocks anyone. That may be its most unsettling achievement. Death has become familiar. Headlines that once would have stunned now barely slow the morning routine. The country has learned how to live with loss, which is not the same as accepting it, but close enough to keep going. Lincoln, facing re-election, knows the truth, even if he rarely says it out loud. If the war stalls, if it drags on without visible progress, he may lose. And if he loses, the entire effort to preserve the Union and end slavery could unravel in negotiations and compromises that smells suspiciously like surrender. Timing matters now in a way it never has before. So Lincoln commits fully to the kind of war that ends things. Ulysses S. Grant is promoted to command all Union armies. He does not celebrate, he simply moves. His plan is brutally simple. Apply pressure everywhere, never disengage, never give Lee time to recover. If the Confederacy wants peace, it will have to be because it can no longer fight, not because the Union grows tired of trying. In Virginia, Grant and Lee lock into what becomes known as the Overland Campaign. Wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor. The names blur together, linked by trenches, smoke, and relentless casualties. Grant does not retreat after losses. He shifts, he flanks, he presses forward again. Each battle costs thousands of lives, and each one brings the Union a little closer to Richmond. Lee, brilliant as ever, responds with skill and desperation. His army shrinks, replacements are scarce, supplies scarcer. Still, they fight, because stopping feels like admitting something they are not yet ready to admit. Cold Harbor is the moment many remember, a frontal assault that lasts minutes and leaves fields covered with Union dead. Soldiers pin their names to their uniforms before advancing, a quiet acknowledgement that survival is unlikely. Grant regrets it. He says so later, but the war does not pause for regret. Meanwhile, farther south, William Tecumseh Sherman prepares for a different kind of campaign. Sherman understands something that makes people uncomfortable. Armies fight, yes, but societies sustain armies. Break the society, and the army follows. When Sherman marches into Atlanta, the city burns. Smoke rises into a sky that has seen enough of this already. Atlanta's fall is a turning point not just militarily, but politically. In the North, morale surges. Lincoln's re-election suddenly looks possible, maybe even likely. Then Sherman does something radical. He cuts his supply lines and marches east to the sea. 60,000 soldiers moving through Georgia, dismantling infrastructure, destroying railroads, seizing food. Not out of cruelty, at least not entirely, but to demonstrate something undeniable. The Confederate government cannot protect its people. The war is everywhere now. Civilians watch columns of blue uniforms pass by their homes, hear the crack of burning timbers, feel the ground shake under wagons and boots. Some resist, some hide, some simply watch, numb. This is total war, stripped of romance. In Virginia, finally, Grant corners Lee at Petersburg. Trenches stretch for miles, foreshadowing wars yet to come. Disease spreads, food runs out, desertions increase. The Confederacy is exhausted. Richmond falls quietly, almost anticlimactically after years of symbolic weight. Jefferson Davis flees. The Confederate capital burns behind him, set alight by retreating forces and chaos.
The dream dissolves not with a single dramatic collapse, but with a slow, painful realization that there is nothing left to hold on to. Lee retreats west, hoping to resupply, hoping for one last chance that no longer exists. Grant follows, patient, relentless. At Appomattox Courthouse, surrounded and outmatched, Lee makes the decision. The meeting is brief, polite, almost gentle considering everything that has happened. Terms are offered, weapons are surrendered, soldiers are allowed to go home. No victory parade, no humiliation, just an ending. The war, officially, is over, but endings are complicated things. Celebrations erupt in northern cities, bells ring, crowds cheer, relief pours into streets like rain after drought. 4 years of tension release all at once. For a moment, it feels like the country might actually breathe again. And then, just days later, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. The shock is immediate and profound. A nation that has survived war finds itself grieving the man who guided it through it. The timing feels cruel in a way history often does. Lincoln does not live to see the peace he secured. He does not live to shape what comes next. And what comes next will matter just as much as the war itself.
What the war left behind. The fighting ends, but the noise does not stop. It changes shape. The cannons fall silent, yet the echoes linger in ruined towns, in empty sleeves, in places at dinner tables where someone used to sit. Peace arrives without instructions, and the country has to figure out what to do with it. The United States in 1865 is technically whole again. Emotionally, it is fractured. The land bears scars that will not fade quickly. Railroads lie twisted, fields are burned or abandoned. Cities like Richmond and Atlanta resemble skeletons of their former selves. Millions of people move through this landscape carrying trauma they do not yet have words for. And then there are the newly freed. 4 million people step out of slavery and into uncertainty. Freedom is real, but it is fragile. It comes without land, without money, without protection, and without a clear guarantee that it will last. Former enslavers, many of whom have lost wealth and status overnight, are not inclined toward generosity. Some accept defeat with bitterness. Others begin, immediately, to look for ways around it. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. On paper, it is definitive. In reality, it is the beginning of another struggle entirely. What does freedom mean if you cannot vote, cannot own land, cannot defend yourself in court? What does it mean if the same people who controlled your life yesterday still control your options today? Reconstruction begins as an attempt, imperfect and contested, to answer those questions. Northern politicians argue among themselves about how harshly the South should be treated. Some want reconciliation, others want accountability. Radical Republicans push for civil rights protections, voting rights, and federal enforcement. President Andrew Johnson, who succeeds Lincoln, prefers a gentler approach toward former Confederate leaders and a colder one toward freed Black Americans. This combination does not age well. Southern states move quickly to pass Black codes, laws designed to restrict the freedom of Black citizens without explicitly using the word slavery. Vagrancy laws, labor contracts, legal traps disguised as order. Freedom, it turns out, can be narrowed without being abolished. Violence fills the gaps left by law. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan emerge, cloaked in secrecy and terror, enforcing racial hierarchy through fear. Federal troops intervene at times, trying to impose order and protect voters. Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not. The battle lines of the war shift, but they do not disappear. For a brief period, there is progress. Black men vote, they hold office, schools are built, churches become centers of community and resilience. It is not perfect, it is not safe, but it is real. And then, slowly, deliberately, it is rolled back. As Northern interest wanes and political priorities shift, Reconstruction loses momentum. Compromises are made, Troops withdraw. White supremacist governments reclaim power across the South. Jim Crow laws follow, building a system of segregation and disenfranchisement that will last for generations. The war ended slavery. It did not end inequality. It did not erase hatred. It did not resolve the tension between American ideals and American reality. It simply forced those contradictions into a new phase. Veterans age. Some talk about the war. Many do not. Monuments rise, not always to remember truth, but to shape memory. The lost cause narrative reframes defeat as nobility and slavery as incidental. History becomes another battlefield, quieter but no less contested. And yet, the Civil War changes the United States permanently. Federal power expands. The idea of a single, indivisible nation becomes stronger than the idea of a voluntary union. Citizenship gains new meaning, even if it takes a century to approach fairness. The Constitution grows teeth. Every major American debate that follows carries echoes of this conflict. Civil rights, states' rights, federal authority. Who belongs? Who decides? The war never really leaves, it just learns to speak in different voices. When people ask whether it was worth it, there is no simple answer. The cost was staggering, the suffering immense, but the alternative, a nation built permanently on human bondage, is not a comfortable thought either. History rarely offers clean choices, only necessary ones. And so we arrive at the end, not with closure, but with reflection.
A country still listening. By the time the last veterans are gone, the war has already turned into something else. Memory, story, argument. The American Civil War slips out of living experience and into myth, where it becomes easier to reshape and harder to confront. And yet, it never quite settles. It lingers, like a sound you notice only when the room grows quiet. Stand in an old battlefield at dusk. The air cools. Birds settle into trees that once shattered under artillery fire. Grass grows back. It always does, but the land remembers in its own way. Shallow depressions where trenches ran, uneven ground where too many people fell too quickly, places where silence feels heavier than it should. This is what the war leaves behind, not just dates and names, but a permanent tension in the American story, a reminder that the country was not born whole and did not heal cleanly. It had to fight itself to decide whether its ideals were promises or decorations. The Civil War answers one question decisively: the Union is not optional. States cannot simply walk away when the vote does not go their way. The federal government, once tentative and limited, emerges stronger, more assertive, capable of reaching into daily life in ways the founders could barely imagine. This power will be argued over endlessly, but it will not disappear. Another question takes longer: who is America for? The war cracks open the definition of citizenship, but it does not finish the work. Freedom comes in stages, fought for again and again by people who were told repeatedly to wait. The Civil War begins the process. Reconstruction stumbles. Later movements pick it up. None of them exist without what happened between 1861 and 1865. Even the way Americans argue traces back to this moment. The moral certainty, the suspicion of compromise, the belief that history itself is on one side. The Civil War teaches the nation that some disagreements cannot be split down the middle, that some conflicts demand resolution, even at terrible cost. And yet, it also teaches something quieter, that victory does not mean peace, that winning a war does not mean winning the future. The hardest work often begins after the shooting stops, when the adrenaline fades and all that remains is the long task of living with what has been done. Lincoln understood this. In his second inaugural address, delivered as the war was nearing its end, he spoke not of triumph but of humility, of binding wounds, of malice toward none. It was not a naive hope.
It was a warning, a recognition that without deliberate effort, the peace could fail just as easily as the Union once did. In many ways, it did, and in many ways, it is still failing and still being rebuilt, all at once. The American Civil War does not sit safely in the past. It breathes through laws, through language, through the arguments that flare up whenever the country tries to define itself. It shows up in classrooms, in courtrooms, in protests, in quiet conversations that begin with, well, if you look at history, history is not a judge, it is a mirror, and the Civil War holds that mirror closer than most. So here, at the end of this long night, we let the noise fade again. The marching stops, the guns cool, the flags are folded and refolded until their meaning depends entirely on who is holding them. What remains is a question the war never fully answered, only passed forward. Can a nation built on ideals survive when those ideals are tested by fear, power, and human weakness? The Civil War says yes, but not easily, not quickly, and not without cost. The clock keeps ticking, the wind moves through the trees, and somewhere the past listens, waiting to see what the present will do with what it left behind. And on that quiet note, we let the story rest.